Thanks for checking out our podcast. If you are interested in learning more about writing, go check out our syndication page, seriouswriter.com, where you can find resources, articles, videos, topical classes, and the Brew and Ink podcast. Again, seriouswriter.com. We thank you for listening.
All right, everybody, and welcome back, faithful listeners, to another episode of the Brew and Ink podcast. We got Katie here, we got Britt here, and we got Steven here.
What's up?
And we got you guys, our faithful listeners. We are excited to have you here on this journey with us, whether this is your first episode that you listen to or whether this is your 60th. How many are we on now?
Oh, there's been a lot.
Yeah. We are happy to have you. So,
Yes.
In case you aren't aware of what we are an interactive storytelling experience, and we are a couple of writers that are setting out on a journey to give you engaging, inspirational stories. But at the same time, we're also challenging ourselves, writers' prompts, essentially.
Writing prompts, topics.
Yeah, keep ourselves writing, challenging ourselves within word count and within curveballs, within the narrative, things like that. But you guys are the ones that get to throw those curveballs at us.
That's right.
Because we'll give you options to vote on in between each chapter, and then we have to incorporate that into our writing.
Booyah.
So that's a quick little snippet of what we are and what we do. You are coming into episode 3 of our 6th season. This season is titled Hero is a 4-letter word. Britt kind of coined that one, and we're like, yes,
yeah,
we love that. Let's run with
I've
that.
had that title for a while and kind of the basic idea, and I'm like, I really like this title. I want to use it somewhere.
Yep. And so a little bit later in this episode, you will hear the third part of
Booyah.
This story written by Britt.
That's right.
But first, we've got a topic that we want to talk about. A little bit.
I don't know if you guys want to talk about it. That's an iffy statement to me.
I would like to have a conversation.
Conversation,
about it. Yeah.
a discussion.
Yes, a discussion.
Your mommy and I were just discussing things, dear.
Yes. Before we go there, let's talk about what we have been starting on so far. We've got a few different drinks here.
Yeah.
The brew part of our Brew and Ink.
That's right.
We've got some beers from Stillfire Brewery, a local brewer here in Georgia and
Good
Suwannee.
friends.
And we started off with their Blue Bandito because we figured it went well with our Western motif of the story that we're writing.
I did. And it's a Mexican ale, and I actually really like Mexican ale.
It's really good, too.
It is pretty good.
A 5.3. If you can get yourself over to Stillfire Brew, I would recommend getting one of these.
I highly recommend. I'll be there Tuesday night.
Later on, we'll be in Space Bandit Galaxy, which is a pale ale, and I am looking forward to opening that one.
It's actually pretty good.
And not on the table, but happily in my belly, is Creature Comforts Athena.
Oh, yes.
It's really good.
That is a
nice
good one.
and smooth and a little citrus.
Creature Comforts is a great,
Yeah.
it's a great
Yep.
spot.
And then you started the Stillfire Hard Seltzer Key Lime. You
Yeah,
said
it tastes
was really
like
good.
yogurt.
Tastes like yogurt. Like a key lime
I
yogurt.
had a good key lime yogurt.
But all of these things will help us facilitate this conversation.
Yeah, right.
This topic. So, what is it that we're going to talk about? Britt came with this idea, this topic, which you got from a book.
I got from a book. It's a very, I'm going to say very famous book, but it is a book that has been suggested to me several times over the years.
Yes. It's not the art of war, but the war of art.
And
Very
it's,
different.
It's written by a guy by the name of Stephen Pressfield, and he is a very successful screenwriter in Hollywood, and he kind of gives a lot of his like principles, life lessons, and stuff that he's learned, and it's part metaphysical and existential, and it's part practical.
Yeah.
I mean, he's got a little bit of everything in there, but it's. Like I told these guys before we came on air, I said it's literally a book that even though I am a published writer, which a lot of people would be like, "Oh, you've made it,"
Right.
I still read it and went, I think I'm an amateur. Like,
what am I doing?
Like
Yeah.
I mean, it's a very, and he's not mean about it. He's just very like
cut and dry,
but also he is inspiring. But the inspiration is, if you want this, it's there. You just have to apply yourself in these ways.
Yeah.
And that's what he had to learn. So it's a phenomenal book. I can highly recommend it. But basic idea that I was kind of introducing was that inspiration is for amateurs. This is something that he says. That,
yes.
And he comes at that from the philosophy that in life there is resistance. So this is very metaphysical, and we're people of faith in here, so we would have our own perspective on this. So he doesn't make it a Christian thing necessarily, but it's very metaphysical in the sense where he says there are two different forces happening in life, and there is the force. There's creative energy.
Yeah.
If you make something new that inspires people, that brings change, that brings progress, all that stuff. And he says there's also resistance to that.
Yeah.
There's resistance to that.
And I haven't read the book, but I would say, to me, another way to sort of explain that, which is kind of how I've been explaining it to my son, is that there's two different ways you can go through life. You can go through life as a creator, or you can go through life as a consumer.
Yep.
And the more you consume, the less you're going to create, or less time you're spending creating.
Yeah, that's
but
good.
Sometimes consuming can be the inspiration that leads you to create something.
Yeah.
But there is a balance.
Yeah, there is a balance. And there's also, how are you consuming?
Yeah.
Right?
Are you consuming to learn, or are you just consuming to numb?
Like, I don't know how annoyed my kids get with me, but every now and then they do.
It happens from time to time.
Well, but we can't just sit and watch a movie. I will stop it and ask them questions.
Right.
Because they're all writing stories. They're all writing books. Like,
Yes.
it's not like I'm doing this just to annoy them.
Right.
Like, they're all writing their own stories. Micah is world building for a book that Elisha is writing.
No, nice.
Right?
Cool.
So, like, and Hosanna is writing a book, and they're sharing it with their friends on Google. And I mean, they're in this world. And so we were watching Raiders of the Lost Ark as an example.
Yeah.
Because I was reading about Raiders of the Lost Ark in another book that I've read. I'm reading called Story by Robert McKee. Fascinating. It's really long, but it's really good. And he was talking about Raiders of the Lost Ark and some of the things in the screenplay and the story and stuff. And so and it's on Netflix, and Becca's been like, I could watch that again. And the kids are like, man, we haven't watched that in a long time. So we sat down and watched it. And we get to the part where Marion is introduced.
Yes.
Right? So they talk about her. Oh, well, she, you think Marion will be there because he's going to go see her dad because her dad might have this amulet thing.
Is her first scene in the bar?
Her first scene
Yes.
is her drinking a man under the table.
Yes, that's right.
That's our introduction to her. And so as a writer, I stopped. I hit pause. I said, why is Steven Spielberg and the writers, George Lucas, why are these guys introducing this character like this? What are they trying to tell us about her?
Right.
Because they're not going to sit there and tell us an exposition about her.
Right, they're showing.
They're showing us who she is. Well, she's tough. And she's better than a man. And in other words, she's not just a damsel in distress.
Right.
And this is the 1930s, and that would have even been more, not controversial, but odd for the day and all of that stuff. And so my point is that how you consume is important too. Like, are you consuming? Because I still enjoy, like, you can get to the point where you're not enjoying the actual movie.
Yeah.
You're just dissecting it.
There are a lot of movies that are ruined for me because they're not well written.
Right.
And I'm dissecting them as they're going. The other people are like, oh, I thought it was a good movie. And I'm like, okay, if you were just sitting back enjoying it, yes.
Yeah. But you have to get to the point where you can still enjoy a movie, or you enjoy food, or whatever your thing is, and then say, well, how did they give that experience to me? How did I really enjoyed that? That really affected me. How did they do that?
There's a difference between eating the burger and trying to figure out how they made that burger.
Yeah, exactly. Like, what is in this?
Yeah.
And so there is a difference between consuming and creating.
Yes.
And if all we do is just to consume in a kind of a lazy way, then yes, I would agree that that's not the way to do it.
So back to the topic.
Where
basically it's a more concise argument is that inspiration is for amateurs, because inspiration could be something that you're just watching, reading, experiencing, consuming, but also at the same time, a lot of writers, a lot of creatives will depend on a feeling of being inspired
Right.
before they want to create.
Right.
So, a lot of times you'll get yourself to a point where you're like, oh man, I just heard this song, and it reminded me of something, or maybe think something. Now I really want to go write, or I really want to go draw, or I really want to go, whatever, try and write a song. And that's not bad.
No.
That's part of the creative process. You've got to have inspiration, before you can start
Yeah.
being a creative person.
That's why we want to create,
Yeah.
right? I mean, that's the core of why we want to create, is because that art inspired us.
Yeah.
And so we want to do that for other people.
Yes.
It's a really positive thing when you think about it.
Yes. But the author in this case, his point is that if you want to be a professional at your art, at your whatever it is that you're doing, what you're going after as a writer, if you want to be a professional writer, then you don't only rely on inspiration. You start finding a way to make it a part of your daily routine.
You make it a part of your routine. You make it. You have a discipline, because his point is that
Discipline trumps inspiration.
that you discipline yourself, and when you act within that discipline, then you get inspired.
Discipline triggers inspiration.
Discipline triggers inspiration. It actually it gives a framework for inspiration.
Yes.
Like
Right.
there's years of skill, and it kind of reminds me of one of my favorite stories, which is about, I think it's Picasso, and somebody went up to Picasso and said, "Will you paint a portrait of me, or draw a portrait of me?" And this might be legend. This might not
Sure.
actually have happened. And
Ladies and gentlemen, this could be hearsay.
this could be, but I like the story because it makes a point to me that, so Picasso drew it, and it took him 5 minutes, and it was amazing.
Of course.
And he hands it to him, and he says, "That'll be $1,000." And they said, "But you
took
only
you 5
that
minutes?"
took you 5 minutes." He goes, "No, that took me 30 years.
Right.
You saw me
Honing.
do it in 5 minutes."
Yeah.
But that actually took me 30 years to get to the point where I could do it in 5 minutes. And so Pressfield's point is basically that there are these two forces at work, and that there is and he literally says, like, he's like, "I know this is weird, but I'm telling you, there is a spiritual element to this."
Mm-hmm.
So there is a spiritual resistance to you being creative.
I've felt it,
And
I'm familiar
and so
with that feeling.
you will find any reason not to be creative. You will have a litany of reasons not to be creative.
You'll even have productive procrastination.
You'll have productive procrastinations, and they will all be things that could be good things, but then you get into a habit. The habit you then get into is not being creative.
And it's hard to break a habit.
And it's hard to break that habit. We can get kind of spiritual, because I know we're people of faith, and anybody listening, you can have, everybody has their own beliefs, but as people of faith, I talked about it today, like the disciplines of the faith, prayer, reading scripture, whatever, the disciplines of the faith, they aren't ends in and of themselves. Those are
Right.
disciplines, because within those disciplines, you get inspiration. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Like, people do those disciplines not because prayer in and of itself doesn't make you a better person.
Right.
But it inspires you. That actually means to, like, fill you with the Spirit. Somebody might want to look that up. But inspiration means something about being filled with the Spirit. Like, you're being inspired by something. And I'm inspired every time I hear an amazing song. I'm inspired every time I see a great movie. I'm inspired every time.
Right.
But when you get to the point where you're the one creating, it takes a certain amount of discipline,
Yes.
so that you can give that inspiration space. It happens to me all the time. Here's another way to put it, and this is a less Christian way to put it, but creativity is so important and precious to us. I mean, think about what happened when the whole world locked down.
Right.
What did we turn to? Books, movies, TV shows.
Right.
Like what did, like, you know, Disney
Self-made,
Plus, like
yeah.
all these people are like, you know, people started making masks.
Good News Network.
Good News Network, which was amazing, right? Like there was all these very positive things that happened. People turned to things that could inspire them, whether that's even just you know, devotionals or something that inspired them. And it's such a precious thing to us.
Right.
I don't think people realize how story is embedded in who we are. Like this is who we are. This is part of our makeup. We tell stories. Every culture tells stories. And that's part of even their sacred culture. They tell stories. This is part of who we are as human beings, as we tell stories. And we, even if, whether it's to entertain or teach or worship, whatever it is. And it's so precious that Pressfield, I'm paraphrasing, and I'm not paraphrasing, I'm saying it in my own way. Pressfield would say, the muse won't show up until she thinks you're serious about it.
Okay.
Like the muse actually doesn't show up until she thinks you're serious. Like that you will really give yourself to this. It's just that idea that when you're a professional at something, and his point is that and I've just noticed this to be true because now that I'm more aware of it, I see it happen more. For instance, there was a scene recently that I was writing in my book Elowen, and I started the scene. I didn't know what was going to happen at the end of the scene.
Which I love.
I totally didn't know.
That's one of my favorite ways
but I
to
knew
write.
something needed to happen.
Yeah.
I knew, like, I can't finish the scene and just something happened. Something important needed to happen. Something needed to change.
And usually what happens is you start writing that scene and then you're like, wait a minute, that thing from back earlier in the chapter, this is exactly where that gets wrapped up.
And it happens all the time.
Yeah.
I don't know what it's going to be when I sit down, and I dread it. I'm literally dreading it when I'm sitting there because I'm like, I suck. I'm horrible at this. I can't do this. And like you have to fight through it. And his point is, if you're going to be professional, you have to be able to, at anything, you have to be able to work through that and get to the point where it's not that you're not inspired or creative. It's that you don't wait to be inspired or to be creative.
Katie, what is your thought? I mean, as from like an artistic side and writer side?
It's a lot easier for me to discuss this topic from an art aspect because that's what I'm doing all the time. Filling up my sketchbook, trying to figure out how these characters in my head look and pose and move. But it's a lot harder to take that to a finished piece. With writing, writing's a lot harder. I recently self-diagnosed myself as having ADD. The inattentive type, so not hyperactive, but just I can focus so hard on specific things that take my fancy at that day or the month, those weeks. And so like that's what happened with Bone Breaker. I was reading Women Who Run with Wolves and a couple other things and had been doing some world building for another character, some just background stuff, and just connected the pieces and just the story developed. I was able to focus so much on the world building and just the basic of the story, but I haven't been able to sit down and write it. And writing is a little iffy because it's going to be a graphic novel if it ever happens. But just
that's still writing to me.
Yeah,
that's still writing.
Yeah, for me, it's like figuring out what is the lack of discipline and being able to find that discipline. Once I lose the focus, it's hard to get it back. So last week I did the chapter for Here's a Four-Letter Word, and I started that Sunday. But it took me all day to get those words on paper.
Right.
And, when I'm in the groove, when I'm in the mood, like I can just spit stuff out all day long, but just trying to find that pace. You're talking about writing for 15 minutes and then it kind of clicks. And 6 hours later, I still have one paragraph.
Or 6 hours later, you go, I'm not using any of this. I got to start over.
Yeah. And I've been there too.
Yeah.
I want to have the discipline to just sit and write every day. As a mom with a 1-year-old and a lot going on around the house, like that's hard to do.
Yep.
I'm still balancing, trying to figure out what's actual procrastination, what is actually putting it off, and what is just something else.
Attending to your day in, day out routine. Yeah, so I would say in the realm of art compared to what we're talking about here with the topic, I would say the sketchbook is the discipline.
Having time to set aside for that, I think, would be very useful. I've grown up doing role plays, so collaborative story writing since I was online since I was 12, and a couple years before that, just passing notes back and forth.
Right.
And I found that like the short essays and short stories and pieces I'll write for my, nonfiction stuff, and then pieces for my role play partners. Like that's where really I feel like I excel at. And it's just the being able to go long form or with my drawing projects, having the discipline to do a graphic novel or even a picture book gosh, that's so much harder.
To me, what you're talking about, what I've had to learn is smaller goals. Like today, I'm not thinking I'm going to finish a book.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, today I'm thinking I'm going to finish this page.
Yeah.
Or I'm going to figure this one part out. Or I'm going to, like for me, the way that I have to do it to finish books is to say, I'm not thinking about finishing a book.
You're eating the pie a bite at a time.
I'm thinking about how do I get Elwyn into the next room and it sound good.
Right.
Right? That's all I care about in that moment.
It's true. When you start thinking about like, oh, I got to get this character to this location, have them interact with these people, and then kill them off or whatever.
That's big enough.
Yeah. You start going, wait a minute. I just need to where is he at?
Yeah. I mean, and sometimes it's little things because I mean, I'm more of an outliner. I'm not really an outliner, but I'm more of an outliner. I know the basic arc of the story, where I want to go, where I want to land.
Sure.
And so for me, so for me, I really, since I'm not a pantser, I really have to put my ideas out of my head. I have to stop thinking about where I want to land the plane.
Sure.
Because I can think about that later when I'm editing or revising. Right now, I have to think about how do I express the emotions that the characters are feeling right now. Because my character isn't thinking about the end of the story. My characters are thinking about this just happened to this person, and I'm here, and now I'm fighting this person. Or that's where my character is, and I have to. How do I express this in a way? And then, like I said, I've tried to do a better job at thinking in scenes and say, how does a scene a little story? So, like, I'm writing a short story. Like, when I'm writing 1,000 words, I'm literally writing a short story. I'm literally saying, how do I go from goal to twist and turn and yes, but, and no, and. Like, how do I get to that at the end of the scene? How do I get there? And if I get halfway there, I'm like, I'll finish that tomorrow. Like, I have to think of it in smaller chunks, or else it will overwhelm me.
It's funny. I was just reading today about Dan Harmon and the writers for Community, and how they came at that show, and that each character, each scene, each little, even like the one-off jokes, all had to almost form within this cycle, the story cycle of. And I don't remember exactly what it was, but it's basically like the character, it's comfortable. The character now has a desire that they want. They have to leave their comfort zone to get that. When they obtain it at the cost of something, and then they come back to their, comfort zone in a way that it has a resolve to, whatever happened as a cost of obtaining their goal. And they said that everything was written within that mindset, that cycle of, like, even the one-off jokes.
Yeah. And so even a great joke is a mini. So just to encourage you, like, that's still great writing. I mean, like being able to tell a story in 500 words is actually really, really difficult. Like that's actually a really, really difficult thing to do. And so, and if that's what you do and that's what you're good at and that's your thing, then that's cool.
There's an aspect of being an author, being a writer that hits home for me. I don't feel inspired to make social media posts, you know?
Right.
Or to update a blog or...
I'm so bad at that.
Yeah. And it's not about being inspired to do it. It's about doing it because it's a part of the cycle or it's part of what you're having to do as part of your marketing or whatever. And sometimes you just have to tell yourself, look, you got 15 minutes. This is the time to do this thing.
This is the time to make the Instagram post.
Figure out what you're going to write.
You know, and even if it's, and it doesn't have to be earth shattering, you know, like those kind of things. Like that's what I'm saying. Like, I'm not saying have low expectations of yourself as much as I'm saying like, don't have overwhelming expectations of yourself.
There you go.
Don't have such overwhelming expectations of yourself that we are all our own worst critic most of the time.
Yes.
Right? And so it's really easy for us to sit down and turn off the critic and just create and just be fun and just have fun. And that's and not and have be okay with that. Be okay with that as the goal today, because soon if you do that on a regular basis, you're going to have 80,000 words
before you know it.
To now go, oh, now how can I bring the critic back? How can I, now I can look at this and be critical.
Yeah.
And but that's just, again, my experience, and that book really, I've talked about it before, but that book really put it in some language that I really appreciated. When he talked about the two different forces in life, because I feel it.
Right.
I feel it at times.
Yeah.
It's really easy to, you're 2 days gone and you're like, oh man, I haven't touched this.
Yeah.
I've been wanting to do this every day. And then you feel bad because you haven't been doing it for 2 days or whatever.
Yeah.
We talked about those sort of goals before, but just realize you're fighting against something real, something that everybody fights against, which is this resistance to have progress and be creative and innovative and different.
Yeah. And are you going to be an amateur about it or are you going to be a professional about it?
Right. Yeah.
So speaking of which, how did you tackle this chapter? Were you inspired? Did you wait until you had inspiration to start writing this?
No. I waited till Saturday. I wanted to have a good idea of where we were in the story, and I process it better. Pause.
This Space Bandit Galaxy is really good.
You like it?
It's got some nice fruity esters to it.
I thought it was a little fruity today too when she. So when
it's just a pale ale, it's not an Indian pale ale or anything like that. But
no, it's not super hoppy. It's really still smooth. When she had me try it today, because they didn't have my Kilt Chamberlain, my Scottish ale that I wanted. I was like, yeah, that's not bad. I said, I think Steven would like that. Let me get a crowler of that. No, I just wanted to see what the next steps should be. Because I knew what I wanted to do, and I didn't get to do all that I wanted to do because I was like, you know what? There's been a lot of stuff that's been set up. Now let's take a step. Again, not have such overwhelming expectations of myself that you feel like a failure, right? You say well, what's the next step? What's the next progression in the story that needs to happen now? So I think I did it. We'll see. We'll see what everybody thinks.
Well, let's take that next step.
Let's do it.
In the progression of the story. So now we're going to jump into Chapter 3 of Hero is a 4-letter word. This is called
Progress. Chapter 3, Progress. It began raining around that afternoon. The region around Pride's Creek didn't get much rain, mainly a few weeks in the spring when businesses would close and people stayed indoors due to the constant downpours. It happened a handful of times the rest of the year, but when it did, the storm was sudden. Callie had looked to the north and noticed the thick black clouds approaching, covering the clear sky like a dark native blanket. She let out a string of curses that would have made old Cecil chuckle and remember the former days, those days from another life. She pulled the poncho over her wide-brimmed hat, a makeshift tent. The courser underneath her growled. It also felt the coming squall. She put her palm on the thick, leathery neck. "I know," she said. Callie considered finding shelter. A few outcroppings of rock would work. But if Arthur had been attacked by bandits or aquilobos, then she needed to make as much headway as possible before dark. Within the next few minutes, however, the clouds blocked out most of the sunlight. The rain fell all at once like a wave from above. Her shoulders bent from the weight. The courser hung its head. Hours passed and the storm hadn't relented by the time nightfall approached. Callie's eyes strained to scan the landscape and the brush. The rain had erased all tracks. The courser's clawed feet sloshed in the mud beneath. The time came to find shelter. Callie rounded a hill and leaned forward. There were mounds in the mud, shaped smaller than a human. She drew closer. The mounds took better form, the contours clearer. Aquilobo corpses were strewn about the ground. A few feet further down the path, a larger shape lay. A horse. Difficult to tell in the rain, but that looked to be Arthur's saddle. The animal had been attacked by the Aquilobo pack, all right. Large chunks of flesh had been ripped from the horse. The Aquilobos had been killed by a gun. She could see the bullet holes now. She pulled the courser to a stop and put her hand on the stock of the pistol at her side. Looking up slowly, a shadow stood 20 feet to the east. A man. He held a long rifle. "Miss Callie?" the shadow said. Callie's shoulders slumped and she let out the breath she held. "Arthur, is that you?" They both had to yell above the constant roar of the rain. Arthur trudged toward her in the muck. "Yes, ma'am. What are you doing out here?" "Looking for you. Didn't think it wise you were out here alone." She met him just past the dead horse. "Good to see you're alive. You left a mess." He nodded, dumping water off his hat. "Even messier down the path a ways." Callie frowned. "What does that mean?" Arthur turned and walked further east. Callie kicked the courser to follow. Another turn to the south past some trees and a low rise, and Callie let out another string of curses that drowned in the rain. A wagon was overturned a few yards away, boards broken and wheels mangled. No horse corpses littered the road. A body did lay in the mud. A human. It had once been a man. Most of the meat had been chewed from his bones. His head had been left intact enough to reveal a bullet hole between his eyes. Mr. Harris. This was no Aquilobo attack, Callie said. "No, ma'am," he said. "Seems to be bandits." Bandits don't usually shoot well enough to hit a man between the eyes. The head moves quickly, difficult to hit at all, much less square above the nose like that. "Seems like it," Callie said. "I figured the bandits killed him and took the horses," Arthur said. "Hard to tell, but the way the wagon's facing might have been coming home with supplies. Suspect the bandits took them too." She nodded. "His body attracted the Aquilobos and then I come up," Arthur said. "Lucky it were a small pack. Scared a few off once I killed some." "Likely what happened," Callie said. She stared at the bullet hole in Harris's forehead. Didn't look like any powder burns from a close shot. Those don't wash away. Close shot was messier too. No, that was a fine shot from a distance. Only a pro could make a shot like that. Usually a good bandit would shoot center mass, more area to hit, then finish him off when he lay helpless. Not this. On her best day, she could have made that shot 30 years ago. The rain stopped. 1 second a torrent and the next nothing. Callie rolled her eyes. The dark clouds began to part enough to see the twilight beyond. "Gonna be dark soon," Callie said. "We can make camp. You have what you need with you?" "If it's all the same to you, ma'am, I'd like to be getting back," Arthur said. "Tell the sheriff about this, see what he wants to do. I'd rather not leave an older lady like yourself out here alone. No offense." She smirked, none taken. "I'm not so old that I can't make it back tonight if we get moving. A long night, but better that than staying out here." Arthur set his rifle across his shoulder and started walking. With a last look at that hole in Harris's head, Callie turned the courser and followed him. She wasn't too old for a long night of riding in wet and cold clothes, but she was too old not to feel it the next morning. Was it morning? She forced her eyes open. The sun was high above outside, maybe close to noon. Everything was sore, but when she swung her legs over the edge of the bed to get up, her thighs and ass felt raw and stiff. She groaned, and then smelled coffee from the kitchen. The scent alone motivated her to get dressed, pulling her long gray hair back. Every step was painful, but she made it out of her bedroom to the kitchen, and the coffee hot on the stove. She grinned, taking a mug from a peg and pouring a cup. A plate of biscuits and jerky sat on the table. Cecil, that ancient native, was still taking care of her, even after all these years. The front door opened, and the old man came in. "You decide to actually get some work done today?" She lifted the steaming mug. "Thank you for the breakfast." Cecil limped toward her, his right leg swinging straight. He pulled back a chair and sat with her, taking a strip of jerky. When he smiled at her, his dark tan skin crinkled like parchment paper. "Figured you might want some." "You figured rightly," Callie said. A moment passed. "You know anyone who could have done it?" Cecil said. Callie had filled him in during the late hours of the night that she didn't think it was bandits, that it had been a pro. "No," she said. "Who we know this far west?" "No one that's alive," Cecil said. His real name wasn't Cecil, but he had left his other name behind him long ago. And the people of Pride's Creek didn't take to native names anyway. Better for everyone that that name was forgotten. She also had a name she wished she could leave behind. He tore a piece of jerky with the few teeth he had left and chewed for a moment. "What you gonna do?" Callie scoffed. "Nothing. Our own town has a sheriff and a deputy. They can take care of it." Cecil's face went blank. "Sure." The sound of a wagon carried through the window. Cecil's head spun toward the front door that still hung open a bit, his shoulder-length white hair fanning like the remnants of an old broom. Cecil started to rise, and Callie put out her hand to stay him. She pushed back her chair and went to the front door, noting that her pistol was still in her room, hanging over the bedpost. The wagon had stopped, 2 horses pulling and 2 men on the bench seat. They both wore black suits. The older of the 2 stepped down from the wagon and began walking toward her house. He was tall but fit. He wore a pistol, pearl-handled. He walked confident, dangerous but calm. The young man in the wagon carried 2 pistols, one on each thigh. "Get my pistol," Callie whispered. Cecil hopped up, furniture clattering. That man used to move better. But things happen when you get old. He moved with a stiff gait back to her with pistol, and she wore it around her waist by the time the tall man reached the door. She crossed her arms. Trace Whitaker. Trace removed his hat and bowed. "Callie O'Shea, good to see you on this fine day." "You came yourself this time," Callie said. "Won't do you any good." "My answer's the same." He raised a hand in surrender. "Just wanted to talk for a moment, if you've the time." "I smell coffee." "And it's good, too," Callie said. Trace waited through an awkward pause before answering. "Very well. If you'll not invite me inside, we can speak here." "Say your piece," she said. "You seem like a fine, intelligent woman," Trace said. "I thought if we could speak, just the 2 of us, we could come to an understanding." "You'd be wrong," she said. "Still, I'd like to try." Trace put his hands behind his back, still holding his hat. "I have one word for you. Progress." "Progress?" "Yes, progress. You see, I represent the future, Miss O'Shea. The future arrives, whether we like it or not. We can't stop it, no matter how hard we try. Like I said, you're an intelligent woman. Surely you can see that." Callie didn't answer. "People are moving west," Trace said. "Young families, entrepreneurs, farmers, ranchers. And you know how they're going to get here? Don't care." "Ah, but you should. Because it is through progress, through technology, and it is coming right through your front yard. The railroad, the steam engine. It will bring thousands. We've already finished the line through Allagash. Soon we'll continue west." Callie's eyes narrowed. "That's why you're buying up Pride's Creek." Yes, exactly, Trace said. Not me, but my company. We are paying top dollar for land, for farms and ranches here. We aren't thieves or savages. We will pay you handsomely. With that money, you can live anywhere you want. I want to live here, Callie said. This is my family farm, worth more to me than money. It's mine. Your family? Trace clicked his tongue. And who will you leave it to? I've done my research. You don't have children or any relatives. You gonna leave this to the Indian? A savage is older than you. Don't matter, she said. I'll do what I want with it. And now what I want is for you to get off of it. Name your price, Trace said. Everyone has a price. My price is I get to keep my land and be left the hell alone, Callie said. You don't listen very good. Trace nodded. He put his hat back on his head. I'll let you think about it. You're not going to get a better deal than this one, Miss O'Shea. I suggest you take it soon, before it's too late. What the hell does that mean? Callie said. Just what I keep saying. You don't seem to listen well either. The future is coming. Progress can't be stopped. The world turns, and the ones that don't turn with it fall hard. Trace tipped his hat, turned, and left. Callie watched him go. Cecil's voice mumbled from behind her. Don't like that man very much.
Right, nicely done. So that was chapter 3, and I really liked what you did there with some of the choices. I mean, I did come up with the shopkeeper, Mr. Harris, and I sent him on this journey, and you murdered him. You murdered him right between the eyes. Yeah, I knew that.
We all knew that.
He was all cannon fodder. Yeah.
Well, and that was one of the things that I realized as I was reading through. I was like, I don't have time. I have to resolve his story. I have to resolve that. Yeah. That's something I have to resolve, you know?
Yep. And I was thinking we could resolve his story alongside of some of the other things that we've been working on all in one, but I like the way that we're kind of piecing this together. We're getting a little bit from Callie's end. We're getting a little bit from Arthur's end. We're seeing kind of who she's mingling with. Well, I love that Cecil is our first introduction to the natives in this story realm. I really liked, I highlighted this in the thing, I don't know if you saw it, but I love the way you described his dark tan skin crinkled like parchment paper. It was so visceral for me to see that. I mean, I don't know how many people use parchment paper while they're baking. I do a lot of baking. So I was able to, see that in my mind's eye with the parchment paper. But yeah, what did you think about as you were writing this? Like,
I was... No spoiler alerts on this one. But there were a couple things that I wanted to get done.
Sure.
But like we were talking earlier, I didn't want to overwhelm myself with trying to get all this stuff done and then it not be good. I wanted to give the characters a little room to breathe and still move it forward. So I felt like I did. I feel like I moved it forward a good couple steps.
You gave us our first introduction to Trace Whitaker.
Yeah, I really felt like before we saw him do much, I wanted to get a little character, get the conflict really in my mind
well established.
What's the conflict here? What's the conflict going on? What are the forces of conflict that are going on that's kind of catching Callie up in the midst of it? She doesn't really want to be in the midst of it, but what about it is inevitable for her, So just things like that I was trying to establish and still move the story forward a little bit. I think I did. I mean, so I had fun. And I was thinking about this earlier, something that I think we've talked a little bit about, but having the audience give a little bit of information or have a little bit of choice, I think actually helps write the next chapter.
Yeah, a little bit.
I actually think it gives a little direction.
Because you knew where
'cause
you were
sometimes
starting.
Yeah, it's like sometimes you don't know what to do.
Yeah,
right?
you're like,
Like-
oh, I get to write about the weather.
Oh, well, I got to put the weather in there.
Yeah.
Well, what's that going to do?
That
What's
sets the scene.
Yeah. What's the impact of that going to be, and how am I going to bring that in, and how is that going to color what's going on, and at least part of it, And so
Yeah.
so I just had fun with it.
And I like that you went with a rainstorm from just me being the post-production guy. That makes great use of sound effects. Like I
right,
can just
yeah.
hear the rainstorm going on in there.
Definitely.
Those are sound effects I can find.
Yeah.
You know? So I think from what you guys just heard,
Yeah, hopefully
in that story,
Yeah.
the could effects were really good.
Could we record the sound effects ourselves? Do the
Oh yeah,
we could do the little pitter pattering, and then we can make it louder. Were you ever in that youth group thing?
yes. Well, music class in elementary school.
Music class.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. It's like, oh, I can take this sheet of metal and it makes thunder.
There we go.
Katie, from your perspective, you wrote the previous chapter, and then you got to hear where Britt took it. Kind of, what was your reaction to it as you're listening to it? You're like, oh yeah, that's exactly what I'm thinking, or like, what did you do to my character? That's not at all what he was supposed to be.
I loved it. Cecil's spot on,
Yes.
and I like what you did with Harris and Callie's noticing of that. That I feel like that brings in more of her character, her past.
Yeah.
Yes. And
I'm excited to see what Arthur does next.
Yeah.
And I like that she was noticing things and processing things in her head, but she wasn't saying what she was thinking.
Right.
And you had to kind of pick up on that. You're like, wait a minute, that was a dichotomy there. That what she's thinking and what she said was two different things. But yeah, that's great character development. And then I like how you made a connection between Trace Whitaker, and he has a pearl-handled gun just like Callie, but then you put in there that the young man that was with him was carrying two guns. Like he's, like stepping it up, like he's compensating for, overcompensating as a young gun kind of thing. Like he's like, oh yeah, I'm gonna make sure I back this guy up. Like I've got two pistols on my hip. I just, in my mind, I'm like seeing these other characters and like developing them in my head. Like, oh, okay, yeah, this kid's like, overcompensating. He's trying to keep up with the old guy, and you set up this idea that there's someone out there that Callie even is going, wow, this shot that was made was from a distance, and that's something that I could do maybe 30 years ago on my best day. So there's someone out there with skill that rivals hers, or maybe even he's in his prime where she's past her prime, and we're gonna come up against this guy at some point,
Or girl.
Yeah. And
Never know.
Is he a part of, or are they a part of Trace Whitaker's posse, or is this all bandit work? We don't know. We'll get there as we develop the story. Speaking of developing the story,
We have to spin
we've got the wheel
of fortune.
malfortune. Malfortune. And I just
You
discovered...
dressed it up a little bit.
Yep. I wrote things back on there again, and I realized that spinning in this direction tends to make it not sound so wounded in the counterclockwise direction.
You did some experimentation.
I did. So we're going to give this thing a spin.
Because this is for you now. You're next.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. This is going to be for me. Okay. I will take whatever comes my way. Here we go. Okay, so we've got the options of natives,
which we had last time.
but they didn't get picked last time.
They didn't get picked,
So
so
this
we can keep the natives.
Yes, there's another option for that. Spin number 2. It's taking us to writer's choice.
Writer's choice.
Let's see.
Dealer's choice, dude.
Let's see. I want to pick. Let's do outside forces. So this is anything. Could be governmental. Could be someone from another city coming in. You guys get to vote on either natives or outside forces. Could be similar, but the distinction is that outside forces is not going to be natives. It's going to be something other. So I think that wraps this up.
That wraps it up. We want to speak real quickly about Patreon page.
Patreon page, you can go there. You can get extra content.
Extra
so
content.
What we're doing this season is we've got little extra snippets, vignettes is what we're calling them. Vignettes from other character points of view.
I have to figure out how to spell vignettes.
Yes,
there's a G in there, right?
Yes.
Vignettes.
Yes. So it could be maybe a vignette from a major character that we haven't seen yet,
right.
but most likely it'll be from characters that as we come across them in the story. Maybe this chapter's vignette will be from Mr. Harris right before he.
Yeah, we could. Yeah.
You know whatever, but it'll be from Britt's point of. So it'll be the previous writer. So Katie will have a vignette from chapter 2, entwined with chapter 3, sort of thing, and then Britt will write the next vignette.
Yep.
As I'm writing my chapter 4.
Yep.
And it goes like that. So whoever writes the chapter gets to write the next.
So those will be on Patreon eventually, and we have other extra content that we recorded from season 5 with Singularity.
Yep.
That will also be on the Patreon page, and there'll be different reviews and different things going on through the year.
And if you subscribe at a higher enough level, you get things like homebrew recipes, types of coffee that we pick out that we like, and hats, shirts, glasses, mugs,
stuff like that. Yeah.
So if that intrigues you,
it's gonna be great.
Go out and sign up. And as always, you can find us on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and don't forget to raise that glass to inspiration and stay inspired, guys.